Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final town hall meeting for this session. I'd like to start tonight by asking each of you what your greatest accomplishment or two of the session was, and what you're most proud of. Representative Dan, should we start with you?
I think one of the things that happened, which was really neat, was the creation of the Office of Family. And that's going to be housed in the Department of Health and Human Services, but it'll be a standalone, independent office. And they are going to collect data from all the different providers that look out to keep families safe and to protect children. And so I'm really excited about that kind of as a legacy thing, to tell you the truth, Jeff, because I think it's going to make a big difference. It was surprising to me that they're in the state that prides itself, and the value of family, that office didn't already exist. And so it'll be housed. The person that will run that will function at at the request of the governor. And so I think the way it's set up and what it's going to do is going to be, for me, personally, as I walk away from the legislature, that's one thing I'm going to look back on and be very thankful for. And then a second item is that one of the things I noticed last year when I did the study on chronic absenteeism in schools for the Speaker of the House, I noticed that a lot of people were moving towards using online education because they either send a child to a private school, they go to a charter school, they go to their regular neighborhood school, or maybe they homeschool. But all those places have access to the state online education program, SOEP. So one of the things I tried to do was start to fix how the back end of that works so that moms and dads who want to access a course for their child can access it, and they can take a course from any place across our state. So I just feel like that's going to be a big help to education as more and more people realize that that's an option for them, and they'll take advantage of it. So I think in the long haul, that's going to be another sort of a legacy thing for me. And there's more work to be done there, but at least I think we've got a good start. So those are two things that happened in this legislative session that are a big deal. And there's a third one I'd like to go to, but I'll step away. Maybe we can get back to it, let others speak about what they've done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Representative Mike?
Yeah, I think I'll just mention one, and that is it's called State Employee Conscience Protection. And what this was I don't know if you're familiar with our state constitution, but Article 1, Section 4 has the phrase that the rights or the rights of conscience shall never be infringed. But we know that there are folks in our state who have had to choose between honoring their conscience and losing a job or keeping a job or losing it. They've been faced with tasks that violate their conscience. And so what the bill does is says that if an employee of the state is given a task that violates their conscience, that department needs to staff around them so that they can so they don't have to do things that violate their conscience. I'll give you an example. One that happened in the state. I know several, but I'll just mention one. A few years ago, we had a motorcycle police officer in Salt Lake City who was assigned to work in a pride parade. He didn't mind that. He didn't mind. He was assigned to work in the very front, as that they called it the wedge. And what his assignment was to do the tricks. There were 5 of them that assigned to do sort of tricks and things in the the front of the parade, sort of being part of the parade. He asked one of his buddies if he would trade with them and let him do crowd control rather than the sort of the celebratory parade part. His buddy said, yeah, that was great, no problem. They made the swap. But then when the supervisor found out, he said that's not going to happen. You have to do this. Well, over the course of the following days, this motorcycle officer lost his badge and his gun, his job, and it shouldn't have happened. There was someone willing to step in for him and just trade positions with him. And I know of several that kind of a thing has happened. And so again, this bill protects people. I'll leave you with this thought about it, or this information about it. The Notre Dame Law School caught wind of this. So in fact, the law professor from back at Illinois University that I worked on this bill with, they asked us to write an article for the Law Review, and we presented it a couple of weeks ago to the Notre Dame Law School. It's kind of an interesting concept that's not happening in other states. So there you go.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you, Senator Sandall.
Thanks. Again, I apologize. You're just going to get my voice because it's dark in my car. Early on in the session, we've talked about this before. Senate Bill 57 created a process whereby if there are egregious things that we feel like the federal government imposes on the state that we think is outside of their constitutional given rights, we now have a process in place that we can use to go through the legislative process. If enough people vote in the legislature that it doesn't, in fact, harm our rights or harm our citizens, we will then direct our state employees not to be compliant in whatever it is that the federal government is asking for us. Some people have said, well, they're going to challenge it on the basis of the Constitution. It's not constitutional. But I think we're going to take a really hard look before we use the tool and make sure it's a worthwhile piece of legislation or something that we need to push back on and get that done. We were able to do that. The governor signed that in the first 2 weeks of the session. Then kind of went to work on some water and energy stuff that I've been working on in water for a couple of years now, where saved water has a beneficial use. We expanded that more than just the ag water optimization program to all ag water now can participate in that. And energy finally wrapped up last week of the session, and something that probably didn't get as much attention as some of the other, maybe I might call them sexier bill file titles, but Utah Energy Independence, Senate Bill 224, basically directed the Public Service Commission to have Rocky Mountain Power continue to maintain and operate the Hunter and Huntington coal-fired power plants, at least in the near future, until I would suggest maybe the federal government were more permissive in allowing nuclear power to be sited and placed, or geothermal catches up, or something else happens in a baseload situation. We found last May that the resource management plan that Rocky Mountain Power had devised over the last 2 years was hinting for, and maybe even more than hinting, was calling for the retirement of Hunter and Huntington based on federal pushback. And we just took that in our kind of said, no, we're not going to do that. And had a number of meetings, good meetings with Rocky Mountain Power, and came up with Senate Bill 224 that basically will be really big to keep our lights on. It's interesting to note that while we were in session, a national survey study came out, predicted Utah will have the lowest power costs of any state in the nation. And we used to be behind Washington State at number 2. And some of the things that legislatively they've started to do in Washington State to curb their hydro generation has dropped them now to number 8 as far as the cheapest power in the United States. So we want to make sure we maintain that. We want to make sure that's where we're going.
Jeff, I
Fantastic.
just want to make one thing, I was thinking you might ask us our favorite bill, and the one that Senator Sandel mentioned, that SB 57 about the federal government not being able to overstep its bounds. That was in my top 5. I'm glad you mentioned that, Scott, because I love that bill.
Representative Snyder, what are 1 or 2 things you accomplished this session that you're most proud of?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm going to be in my car too. It's a little tight quarters right now at my house, and kids are asleep and in bed, so I am here. From my vantage point, the 2 bills that I feel like are the most beneficial. One is dealing with the Great Salt Lake. It's HB 453. And why that matters to Cache County is, we are upstream of the Great Salt Lake. So finding ways to make sure that the Great Salt Lake and the water therein is consistent with other state statutes is critical for our county as we move forward. Right now, prior to this bill, the Great Salt Lake, or at least the water in there, was kind of the wild, wild west. And for all intents and purposes, every drop that was in the lake was available for depletion. And so we ran a bill that clarified that. It got a little interesting at times. It was a fairly difficult bill, but now moving forward, we've set minimal thresholds, which means we're not going to save water in Cache County or have our senior water rights be depressed because of what's happening in the Great Salt Lake as it relates to mineral extraction. So that would be the first one. The second one is a bill I ran. It's not as it's not as maybe upfront as what Senator Sandel has done on the federal side. I think his bill is very much a big hammer, but there's Supreme Court rulings that are coming right now on the Chevron doctrine. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, the Chevron doctrine was a case from the mid-'80s that basically said that if Congress didn't identify in statute the specifics of a legislation, there is implied powers reserved in the statute to the agencies to execute the statute. And that's everything from clean air, clean water, education. I mean, you go down the list, and a lot of the federal regulation we're dealing with as a result of the Chevron doctrine. And that is under review right now at the Supreme Court. We're expecting a review this summer, and this is a Supreme Court that's overturned a fairly substantive precedent in the past. So Roe v. Wade, Clean Water Act, a few other things. And so in the event that Chevron is overturned, my bill basically says, okay, Chevron's overturned. It starts that as the trigger, and it goes through regulation, specifically in the natural resource environment agencies, and says every rule or reg that we believe is a result of Chevron deference, we need to identify those and then pick the ones we're going to challenge immediately as federal overreach. And it sets aside money, attorney times, all of those things to push back against federal government with the tools that hopefully the Supreme Court will provide. So those would be my 2 tops.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen. Let's move into a question or 2. I've gotten a fair number of emails and texts asking me about the baseball hockey stadium bill for downtown Utah, and I wonder if you could explain what's going on with this bill, because I think there may be some misconceptions out there, and it also depends on what version you're talking about. I understand that the legislature is going to create a special district and build a stadium with some state money, and there's some interesting things in there. So would someone like to take a shot at explaining what's going on with this bill? Because it sounds like something that a conservative might be concerned about.
Yeah, I'll be happy to.
Thank you.
So it's two completely different projects. You gotta understand that they're both in Salt Lake City, but they're completely separate. One deals with, and this is the State Fair Park District, and this deals with what will be, if we get a major league team, it would be Major League Baseball expansion. But the important thing to understand is that about half of the acreage in that district is owned by the state, either sovereign land along the Jordan River, or the 60 acres plus acres that the state owns of the State Fair Park. It is now placed into a bigger district, which is the State Fair Park District. And there are certain things that are beginning to happen right away. There are other things that will happen if Major League Baseball is expanded and we get the expansion team. So the first thing that will happen is development in that district is going to start pretty much immediately. Now, taxing wise, it is done on what we call increment tax financing. So any taxes that are generated inside that district from new business will be what funds that space. The state land that's in the fair park will be very much to an advantage of doing this. In fact, the State Fair Park last year was authorized in legislation to begin some of this before the ball park and those things were even suggested. So this is a great opportunity. If and when Major League Baseball expands, the stadium will be financed partly by Larry H. Miller Group and partly by a 1.5% increase in the rental car tax, and then the monies that are accumulated inside that district from additional sales tax increment. So you would envision a smaller convention space, probably hotels, parking structures, the State Fair Park, the master plan, the Jordan River as being a river walk type atmosphere. All of those plans are incorporated into that based off of basically tax increment financing. Not the only way you're going to pay that is if you go there and use the property of the facility. Second to that is this idea around downtown Salt Lake and the Delta Center and the Salt Palace, and it's its own district, and it involves revitalizing the Salt Palace, Abravanel Hall, the Delta Center, if hockey comes, to renovate it so that it can be a multi-use hockey and basketball arena. And once again, that's just inside Salt Lake. And the Fair Park District, any of those taxes stay there. They don't funnel into the rest of Salt Lake, but the Salt Lake County, or Salt Lake City, excuse me, is part of the revitalization of downtown Salt Lake. And they, again, have tax increment financing that's available for them to do the expansion. So I don't know if that was high level enough or that was too deep in the woods, but that's pretty much what's going on.
Okay. So maybe one of the concerns that I've heard throughout the state, maybe one of you can address this. what's the chance that Cache County citizen tax revenue is going to be used for this project?
I can jump in here.
Thank you.
And I would say under the scenario that's contemplated that Senator Sandel outlined, I would say if you're there, that'll be you have to visit that site or those businesses, and that's where that comes from. And the earlier version of the bill had provisions in it related to the TRT tax, which is the transient room tax, and that got stripped out later in the process. But one of the things that I think we have to have a conversation about moving forward is, so the transient room tax generally is a tax affixed on a particular room at a hotel, right? That's a standard tax. It's existed for some time. One of my frustrations in the sessions that I have been at the legislature is we put a lot of money into tourism, into promoting people going to places in various parts of the state, and we provide those small communities almost nothing in terms of the ability to finance, to capture, or to provide services for those who come. So let me give you an example. Rich County, Bear Lake, that's right over the hill from us, 50% of the emergency service calls, this is ambulances we're talking about, or fire, 50% of those calls originate from people who do not live in Rich County. That's here in Cache County, that's the Wasatch Front, or it's out of state. And yet those small communities are relying on very short budgets to provide those services, or volunteers to provide those services. So rather than serving their population 100% of the time, they're overextending themselves to provide these base level services for the influx. Now, the original version of the baseball bill had the ability to take that transient room tax that is generated in the urban parts of the state and provide a grant application process and a grant opportunity to these rural communities to pull transient room tax dollars out of big Wasatch Front and apply them to the essential services in their communities. Now, it was in baseball, and for some reason, baseball was the only vehicle to allow us to finally touch that fund. But as we move forward, I don't know that I'm getting to the answer to your question, Jeff. I am. But as we move forward, I don't think that there is going to be TRT and all of that wrapped up in baseball again. I think Scott's depiction of how this will get funded moving forward is accurate. But we have to have a conversation long term about how we are going to assist small rural counties without a tax base to pay for the services that we demand of them when we go to visit these small communities. That's at the heart of what was in that initial draft for me. Now that's been stripped out and we've had the debate, but I just wanted to flag that as something that's kind of been lost in this whole discussion.
Okay. Question still on the table. Is Cache County taxpayer money going to be involved in this project?
Currently, it's not. I don't know if that changes down the road, but I can tell you currently, unless you go as a Cache County resident and participate in the activities that are there, either at the state fair or something else that's happening in and around that area, I don't see a taxing mechanism where a Cache County resident pays into this.
That's good news. If the project goes south and it doesn't make money, will the legislature expand the footprint and have to get money from somewhere else? I mean, I read in the bill where if the project dies, that the non-state owners have to pay off the stadium. And it always reminds me of the 30-year guarantee on my roof that I just did. Is that business going to be around 30 years to pay it off. So the law says they have to cover it. Is it even practical? So I think some conservatives might be a little nervous that today it doesn't involve the Cache County citizen, but tomorrow it might. And I don't know
Well,
if there's an answer
but
to
the
that
way,
question.
but you've got to understand the way it's financed. So first of all, envision the ground on the ballpark where the State Fair Park, the district is, and it is going to be financed. They're going to go out into the bond market and base those bonds. Those bonds are going to be sold on what they call revenue bonds. And so whoever does the bonding is ultimately whoever buys the bonds, they're actually taking the risk.
Okay, so we're
that
not
the tax
are,
that
we're
the
not
taxing.
guaranteeing that.
No, I don't.
Okay.
The state wouldn't guarantee that.
Okay, so you've taken the tax objection off the table. I guess the only objection that conservatives might have left is that the state is even involved with this. I mean, if Larry and Ryan want to go put up a ballpark, more power to them.
Well, Ryan isn't involved in the ballpark.
Pick a billionaire's name, doesn't matter to me. I guess the question is why is the state involved in this at all?
Well, the state's involved, quite honestly, because half of the ground belongs to the state.
Okay.
And the State Fair Park Authority, I serve on the State Fair Board. State Fair Park Authority was created last year, and it did not exactly, but almost exactly the same thing when it created authority and envisioned a hotel, some convention space in and around the state fair grounds to continue to utilize the space at the state fair in a better way. This pretty much just amps that up 10 times in that area. And what you're going to see there for the state and the state asset is going to be a seamless experience for the visitor between the State Fair Park and what is across the fair ground that was Rocky Mountain Power Ground across the street, across North Temple. So the state has a very much vested interest in the district, at least in the State Fair Park district.
Okay. And maybe if I can add to that too, maybe from a different angle as well. I agree with what Scott's saying here. The other thing that we're really concerned about is we are looking at other states that are losing their capital cities for a variety of reasons. Salt Lake is the face of our state, and the face that puts on has ripple effects across the economy, including here in Cache County. And you look at other parts of the country where those capital cities or the cities that have the major airport or the major metropolitan area fall apart, it has economic consequences for the state. I can tell you that I am incredibly disappointed in the current administration in Salt Lake City. I think the mayor's office is a little bit of a joke down there. I am grateful. It almost ended up as an amendment in the hockey bill, but I am grateful for representatives like Representative Birkeland, who have put an additional magnifying glass on the attorney's office there in Salt Lake, trying to ensure that people are actually enforcing the laws. We have some major problems down there. I think obviously an economic shot in the arm is good for the whole state, but I can tell you that us taking a hard look at what is happening in Salt Lake and the way Salt Lake is treating crime and all of those things is going to be a follow-on discussion to this. We have to make sure that Salt Lake doesn't become Portland or something like that. That's also part of this discussion.
We got 5 minutes.
But
Representative Dan, Representative Mike, let's take this thing home in the last 5 minutes.
well, I'd like to just thank Scott for his knowledge about what happened there and Casey. And I'd like to take what Casey said just a step further. When you take a look at the TRT tax, I've tried over the years to do some things to expand emergency medical services to the rest of the state. His example over there in Rich is exactly correct. Now just take that on all the rest of the state south of the Wasatch Front. We have millions, not hundreds of thousands. We have millions of people that visit those 5 state parks every year, and other places across the state, and our own citizens as well. So I was able to get 2 things done this year. One is to get funding back to the pre-pandemic level for the Bureau of Emergency Medical Services. And 75% of that $1 million will be in grants that these other rural counties now can apply for and get, so that they can have an upgraded ambulance, supplies, materials, equipment, and so on. And then the other part of it is to upgrade personnel and the back end things in the Department of Safety, where the Bureau of EMS now resides. And then the second thing I was able to get done is to expand insurance to counties of the 2nd to the 6th class, so that somebody who volunteers for a certain amount of time, keeps their license active, would be able to qualify for health insurance that includes dental as well as some life insurance, as a way to incentivize all these volunteers. Because Casey's right. If we don't have volunteers out there, because we can't have paid people in Manila who are going to make 1 run a month or maybe 2. So it has to be with the ambulance, the supplies, materials can be there, but not the full-time person. Has to be a volunteer. Casey, as personally, is a great example of this. He is an EMT person. He does search and rescue, and he's on volunteer fire. The age of volunteering is ending. And if we don't incentivize this a little bit, we're not going to have people out there. So I just tell people, you have a heart attack in rural Utah, you're going to die. Because nobody's going to get there for a long time. And it's going to be a volunteer.
Yeah.
They better darn well be well trained, because if I'm down there and I have a heart attack, I want somebody to come and help me.
Yeah.
You know? So that's
know
kind of
something-
fun.
You know
So-
something a little bit about that, don't you?
I
Okay.
do, but I just want to tell you that I think what Casey and Scott are talking about, the TRT tax, all of that, it's all all of this fits together. And so I just wanted to explain that. That was the 3rd item I wanted to get to, and Casey led me into it.
Thank you. Representative Peterson, you got the last 2 minutes.
I'll be quick. I'll say first, I did have a serious bike accident a few years ago over in Rich County. And I was grateful for those volunteers. I can still see from in the ambulance, I can still see the gentleman who was taking care of me. Like you, Jeff, I have some concerns. I'm always worried about these public-private partnerships and who ultimately is going to be in charge, and what's going to happen. Is the government going to control the private? Is the private going to tell the government what to do? Those concern me. I worry about owning a stadium in a few years that what if it gets abandoned? And I think about the Miller Sports. They got that road race thing out there out in Tooele County. That's a real drain on them financially. I worry about Well, I've said enough. I just, bottom line is, I don't know what this is this is the proper role of government. That's the thought that's always in my mind on this kind of thing.
Okay. All right, gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our final town hall 2024. I want to thank each of you for your service to our county. A great session, a lot of good things that conservatives wanted came out of this session, and I want to personally thank you for all of the efforts that you guys have done this year. And with that, we'll sign off and say we'll see you next year.
Thank you, Jeff, for hosting
Thank
us.
you, guys. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
You bet.